everyone. My name is Miranda Craig, and I will be examining peer pressure today for this project for Module 4. Through this semester, we've examined a whole variety of at-risk behaviors that are results of these causal factors that we've examined in the first part of the semester. And so one of those causal factors of youth participating in at-risk behaviors can be traced back to a lack of adequate academic environment. Another one could be, the media having influence on people, a poor family dynamic at home, a dysfunctional family. And so kind of going off of the premise of at-risk behaviors being partially derived from the academic environment or the peer group, that's where we'll be looking at peer pressure today from the viewpoint of youth in school surrounded by peers who are either exerting positive or negative, in this case, peer pressure on them. And so that's what we will be looking at through this project. When we think of peers, most of us think of the people we went to school with or our coworkers who share a common interest. For the context of this presentation, a peer will be defined as a person of the same age, status, or ability as another specified person, with that person being the youth that we are considering in this course with Dr. Harlan. Peer pressure is also a familiar term for any of us who went to schools who participated in Red Ribbon Week. You may remember coloring photos, learning about the effects of drug use, and even wearing ribbons that say "just say no," and that was kind of the slogan for that. So for the purpose of this project, peer pressure will be defined as an influence or members of one's peer group. So some of the impacts that negative peer pressure can have on teens include a lack of self-identification and trying to find themselves amongst all these different groups who are exerting that pressure to act or to belong or to join. It could potentially lead to self-esteem issues, a decreased self-value if the people that they are getting involved with are not positive people to be around, not valuing them for their character and who they are as a person, but rather, their willingness to conform to the group. It could impact a student or a youth's interactive styles with how they deal with people of authority, deal with their peers who may have differing views. It could affect their relational interactions, whether it be, platonic or sexual. It could lead to negative interactions that way, and a decreased sense of self-esteem could lead to more aggressive behavior, more defensiveness, emotional instability, and trouble cooperating and or communicating with people, in everyday walks of life. And so with that, it affects the attitudes that someone may have towards, like I said, people with differing opinions. Even in an academic case, it could affect attitudes towards the teacher and the importance of doing your work and showing up to school. And then ultimately that kind of lends into the last two, the values and beliefs. So if they're joining a group that is different, or possesses different values than what they were raised with, whether it's because, they don't feel connected to their dysfunctional family, or they don't feel valued or encouraged by their parents or siblings, it could ultimately, lead them into the arms of another group, if you will. And so sometimes you see the values that a child was raised with not being reflected in the values that they choose to follow by their peers. And so moving from childhood to young adolescence to adulthood, it's a developmental process, and these youth are learning to make decisions on their own. And unfortunately, sometimes if they give into negative peer pressure that affects the fragments of their lives shown on this slide, it can lead to a decreased, overall well-being. And so they're trying to find their place. They're trying to feel belong to something bigger than themselves, and figure out who they are and make decisions for themselves. And so it can be difficult when you feel like you have one force at home and then one force in your peer group that's kind of pulling you in different directions. And so from that, youth struggle to, learn who they are, make these decisions, and then also feel as they belong to a group. And so, um, some of the negative effects that we've referenced or reviewed through the earlier part of the semester um, include developing those emotional instabilities, changing their behavioral dynamics to fit in, and to try to relieve that stress of feeling like, I don't really belong to a group, so I need to conform and do what these people say to fit in with them. And so sometimes, the stress gets to be too much, and then they start giving into drug and alcohol abuse. Sometimes depression occurs, eating disorders, and then in the most severe and unfortunate cases, suicidal thoughts or even carrying out the act itself. So listed on this slide are just a couple statistics regarding how peer pressure can affect the youth behavior when it comes to substances, and then also some interpersonal relationships. And so I'm not going to talk too much on them. I'll give you a moment to read through them. Some of them are kind of staggering, but not too surprising, unfortunately. So when we think about intervention and prevention, or perhaps it should be prevention and intervention, I think with all of these behaviors and all of these factors that contribute to these behaviors, that concept of resilience that we looked at the very beginning of the semester really kind of lays the foundation for these youth and these young adolescents to be able to cope with all of these different influences and factors that they're going to face when being raised in these environments. And so, developing those skills and abilities to be able to cope with the stress that may come with growing up in these rural areas that are facing these challenges we've looked at, and hopefully, ultimately, being able to learn and grow from those potentially dangerous, or I guess the better term would be, those trying situations in which those children had to make a decision to act one way or the other, to believe one way or the other, and so forth. I think that, that concept of resilience really kind of encompasses the solution in an umbrella. And so, apart from, the specific actions that parents and or youth can take, fostering that resilience, I think, should be probably the greatest intention of the parents or adults who are in mentoring or counseling positions, so that the students can deal with that adversity, overcome it, and learn to thrive in stressful situations in a healthy way. And so, apart from, allowing them to grow and hopefully develop a good self-esteem, to be proactive and adaptable, to be flexible in these situations, some specific things that youth and parents or adults can partake in are shown on this slide. And so, first it takes a youth learning right from wrong for their reason. And so, actively and consciously being able to stay away from peers who seem wrong or who may potentially promote dangerous activities or behaviors would be important. And then learning to say no when you do encounter those situations with students and or peers who are wanting you to join, their group or the specific behavior that they're executing. And then I think that part of a youth's ability to seek counsel from trusted adults is to not only know right from wrong, but to be confident enough in themselves to say no to those people and to say, this is wrong, this is happening, and I need to take the steps forward to talk to an adult who can help me through this situation. So, staying away from those negative influences, learning to say no when you come across them, and then also knowing that it's okay to seek counsel are some things that youth in these situations with peer pressure involvement can take. On the other side of that, parents and adults, guidance counselors, teachers, They need to be open and honest and create an environment in which these youth can feel comfortable in talking about these challenges that they're facing. Um, they need to show support. I know that, at least even in my own experiences, sometimes adults want to not punish, but want to exhibit the consequences that these youth are getting themselves into, and which is fine, but at the same time, that youth needs to feel supported, and um, even if they do give into peer pressure and make a mistake, that's not going to be all that they are, and so they need to feel supported in a way that they feel comfortable coming to adults and talking to them, knowing that they're going to have that system behind them to help them through that situation. Uh, Regarding peers, it's also important for a parent or an adult to be involved in the child's life, to know who their friends are, who they're hanging out with. We've talked some this semester, or read rather, through the text that, sometimes these at risk behaviors occur because there's a disconnect between the parents and the youth, and the parents don't know what's going on. And so it's really important that, efforts are made to not only encourage that honest communication referenced before, but also to know what's going on in the child's life, to know the kind of people that they're hanging out with after school, during their lunches, when they're hanging out at the park or anything, to be familiar with the habits and the characteristics of your child's peers or their friends, is equally as important as, communicating and being in the loop. And then, we've seen a lot of issues arise from a lack of self-esteem, a feeling of not belonging. And so, obviously, a step that a parent or mentor could take would be to promote that positive self-image and confidence in the youth, to remind them that they are valued as a person, for who they are, not the actions that they carry out, and to know that, they're supported and that people believe in them and are rooting for them and want them to do well. And so, helping with that self-esteem, that self-value, reminding that youth that they are important to somebody, could potentially make the difference for them, choosing to get involved with people who may seem like they value them, but they don't really. They're just encouraging negative behaviors. And then the last tip, found from the resources in the text that I used to derive this presentation, is to develop a distress strategy for those uncomfortable situations. So I talked a little bit about how important it is to encourage open communication, to let the youth know that they are supported. And so I think that with those comes a level of comfort, and, potentially transparency, in that the youth would feel comfortable in calling or sending a text to a designated person saying, I'm in this situation where I'm being influenced or pressured to do something I don't want to do. I need help. And so, this being the last one, I think the four strategies listed above, developing a distress strategy for uncomfortable situations, kind of come together collectively to create this comfort and this trust and this capability of, actually carrying out the execution of a plan, that you've taken the time to discuss, to consider, and to derive from the challenges that the specific youth is going through. And so these are just a few, kind of broad ways that youth and parents and adults can approach this challenge of dealing with peer pressure when it's negative, and then even when it's positive. Sometimes, if you're involved with a tutor group or academic group, it's a good thing that the student is investing in their education and spending time doing what they should do as a student. But kind of the double-edged sword with that is that if the pressure becomes too much to do well, to make those A's, to excel within the group, to get a better grade than their friend. And so, even in instances that peer pressure could be perceived as positive, if taken too far, it could ultimately turn negative and still deliver the same kind of stress, or level of stress, rather, that negative peer pressure could as well. So on this slide, you'll see the references that I used to compile this brief presentation. And then I've also listed two resources that may be helpful for a parent, mentor, teacher, or counselor struggling with kind of leading a youth through this challenge of dealing with peer pressure and figuring out, who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I want to be a part of? And so I've kind of viewed this course as being from the standpoint of that person who would be providing counsel or advice to that youth. And so those are the resources that I chose to include. Thank you for your time and for listening on the information that I presented on peer pressure today.